Chapter 7. Discover the you that's bigger than thought. People often ask me if it's possible, really possible, to recover from an addiction to thinking. The answer, without question, is yes. It's possible. But, and it's a serious but, in order to recover, we have to be ready to fall out of love with our thoughts and with our thinking process. We have to be willing to build a new kind of relationship with our thoughts, one in which who we are is separate from what our mind is telling us. So, too, to break any addiction, we have to hit bottom. Our bottom, which may not be the same as anyone else's bottom. We have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired, anxious, worried, stressed, unhappy, and all the rest. We have to get fed up with our old thinking patterns and behavior and the consequences they're creating. We have to get fed up enough to be willing to forge a new path, a new way of responding to our thoughts when they arise, and a new way of thinking about thinking. There's one thing we can count on. If we keep doing what we've always done, we'll keep getting what we've always gotten. We need to take steps on a new path to go somewhere different. This chapter shares a journey to a fresh way of being. Gain distance with inner listening. The first step in breaking free from excessive thinking is making a commitment to listen in on our own mind. Pay attention to our own consciousness. When we're caught in a thought loop of any kind, what we've lost is space, the space between the one listening to the thoughts and the thoughts themselves. We are fused with the thoughts, and thus unable to hear or see them as distinct entities appearing in front of us. When we're caught, our thoughts don't appear as separate from who we are. Thoughts are us, and we are thoughts. Through the practice of inner listening, listening to our own thoughts, without believing them, we start to create that space between us and our thoughts. By observing the words our mind is speaking to us, we are actively separating from our thoughts, getting them out in front of us, into view, creating an us and an it. In so doing, we're shifting our perspective, so we are now the awareness that sees the thoughts, while the thoughts become objects appearing in front of and within us. Inner listening is not only the practice of noticing thoughts, however. It is also the practice of paying attention to our own attention, noticing where our attention is tracking at any given moment, what it's following, and also what it wants to follow. As we get more skilled, we start seeing not just the thoughts appearing, but also how our own attention is leaning and pulling. The more we practice, the more subtle and refined our ability to notice becomes. Our awareness expands, and with it, our freedom. Exercise. Redirect your attention. Pause and notice the thoughts appearing in your consciousness. Notice what you're paying attention to. Now, purposefully shift your attention away from where it wants to be. Feel what it's like to redirect your attention. Now, shift your attention back to where it wants to be. Practice moving your attention around. Get a feel for that energy or intelligence that actually moves your attention. Take little moments throughout your day to step back and notice where your attention is attending. Play with it. Move it around. Notice where your attention wants to go. Make paying attention to attention a regular practice. Continually invite the question, where is my attention right now? Inner listening is about becoming intimate with our own mind, expert in its tricks, tactics, and propaganda, aware of the ways our mind speaks and moves. The more attuned we are to our mind, the more we are able to hear our thoughts as they're arising. when they're still beckoning for our attention, but before we've disappeared into their lair. This gives us choices, a say in what kind of inner experience we are creating. Our thoughts talk to us in our own voice, which makes it that much harder to see or hear them as something separate from us. Our negative thoughts use our beliefs, fears, past experiences, and everything else to make their case. Our thoughts sound like us, think like us, opine like us, and feel like us, and yet, thankfully, they are not us. In this case, they walk, talk, and quack like ducks, but they are not ducks. In order to see our thoughts as separate from who we are, we have to build the habit of listening closely and consistently to the activity and noise that's taking place in our own head, without believing or indulging it. We have to cultivate the skill and habit to turn our ear inward and tune in our mind's radio station, the one we're listening to, even if we don't know we're listening, even if the volume is turned way down. Listening inward is the primary practice for unhooking from negative thinking, the one we can't do without, the one practice that is a requirement for freedom. Disentangle with acknowledgement and acceptance. As soon as we become aware of negative, obsessive, or any kind of excessive thought, we have to first step off the hamster wheel, and acknowledge the fact that the thoughts are coming and that we're caught in them. We simply mark the present reality of being flooded, deluged, attacked, consumed, or whatever else applies by our thoughts. We stop and say, "Wow, I'm really caught," or "My mind is really hammering me," or whatever acknowledgement feels right in that moment. In so doing, we are deliberately taking some distance from those thoughts, distinguishing ourselves as the one who's hearing them, but is not defined by them. We are setting up two entities, an us, awareness, and a them, thoughts. The moment we recognize what's happening in our mind is the moment we start to feel relief. Acknowledging the presence of thoughts, ironically, allows us to feel disentangled from the thoughts and the whole thinking storm. With acknowledgement, suddenly there's a safe and separate shore from which to observe the thoughts without being drowned by them. It can also be helpful in this acknowledgement and acceptance stage to give a name to our negative thinker. When we label this voice of negativity inside us, it lightens and separates us from the negative messages. Naming creates space. We can use a few different names, too. Matilda for our catastrophizer, the one who reminds us of everything that could and will go wrong. Barbara for our self-critic, the one who reminds us of everything wrong with us. Hal for our grievance keeper, the one who reminds us of every injustice anyone has ever done to us. If you like, match the kind of thoughts to the names of people you've known who remind you of such sentiments. Then have at it. What's key is that when the thoughts arise, we take a moment to acknowledge the voice with its proper name. Oh, look, it's Matilda, here to tell me that I'm going to fail and that it will all end poorly. Thank you for sharing, Matilda. Now you can go. Offer yourself compassion. When we recognize that the negative thoughts are here, we need to pause and name this truth as well. We need to take a moment to consciously offer ourselves a dose of compassion, here, at the center of the storm. We can place one hand on our heart, take a breath, and simply say, "This matters. My experience matters." There is nothing more important in the healing process than to remind ourselves of the most basic and loving truth of all. Our suffering matters. We matter. Knowing, which sometimes means learning, this truth is at the root of all transformation. If more kindness is wanted or needed, We might also say something like, "Wow, I'm really trapped," or "This is really painful," or "I really wish this would stop." Whatever the words that come, we take a moment to honor our experience, what it's like right here where we are. This compassionate pause, the acknowledgement of our own experience, is a critical and unskippable step in the process of breaking free from our self-inflicted unkindness. Inner listening, recognition, acknowledgement, and compassion are the roots of recovery, and in this case, recovery from our addiction to thinking. These fundamental processes lay the ground for transformation. Once we've recognized the truth of what's happening in our mind, acknowledged what we're doing to ourselves, and offered ourselves compassion for our own experience, we can then play with a variety of different contemplations and practices. Get curious about your own mind. A warning. If after hearing and acknowledging your thoughts, you start fighting with them again, or trying to change them, prove them wrong, or annihilate them, you will once again begin working on behalf of your negative thoughts, re-energizing them. The time and attention you invest in fighting with your thoughts actually strengthens them and helps them to better mount their attack. What we resist persists and persists with a vengeance, fueled by our own fighting energy. So, knowing this, remind yourself to do what's most unnatural. That is, give up the fight against what feels most dangerous, and instead of fighting, get really curious about your own mind. Here are some questions that you can pose in the moment, shared as stories, so you can perceive their power at work. What am I believing right now? Kara was taking a walk with her closest childhood friend. They were laughing and enjoying each other's company. Her friend jokingly said that he didn't make friends easily, to which she sweetly and playfully replied, "Well, he made friends with me." His response was, to her ears, a lukewarm, unenthusiastic, and even disappointed, "Uh-huh." She was not happy. They had been having a lovely time, and in an instant she was hurt and angry, and turned around and headed home. As she walked, a tornado was building inside her head, at the center of which was the thought that her best friend had just taken a sweet moment, a moment of connection, and intentionally thrown it away. Her thoughts had also decided that he didn't think it was so great that he had made friends with her back in middle school, and would actually rather have other friends than her. With each step, she was becoming angrier, more resentful, more hurt, and more convinced of her storyline. Back at home, it suddenly dawned on her to ask herself the following question. Was the choice she was making in that moment to stick with her story about what had just happened, moving her closer to happiness or unhappiness? The answer was easy. She knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if she stuck with what she was thinking, her evening, and maybe even her next couple of days, would be prickly, tense, and awful. She wondered if it was really worth it when she could make a different choice and change the whole trajectory of her next 36 hours and beyond. But the question she asked next was the one that really snapped her out of her story and ultimately propelled her to take a different action. She asked herself if she actually believed her own story. Did she believe that the meaning she was assigning to this interaction was really true? With these questions posed, she realized that she was thinking herself into a miserable lather about something she herself didn't even believe was true. She didn't believe her friend wanted or intended to hurt her, or that he wished he were friends with other people instead of her. This new awareness then allowed her to see the ridiculousness in continuing to invest in her current thoughts, and continuing to react to them as if they were true. It also allowed her to feel an entirely different feeling toward her friend. Realizing that he did not want to hurt her actually made her appreciate his kindness, appreciate him. What would I need to know? Sarah, on the other hand, had just come out of a big fight with her husband. She was as mad as a wet hornet. She went through the same loop about how he didn't listen, didn't remember anything she ever told him, and became defensive when she expressed frustration about constantly having to repeat herself. After listening to her replay the same mental tape for the umpteenth time, I asked Sarah what she would need to know, what she could know, that would allow her to let go of this narrative. What truth or understanding, other than her husband learning to pay attention, would free her from this thought loop, would allow her to stop replaying her grievances and reliving her pain? We sat in silence for a minute. When she did speak, what she said surprised me, and her too. Even more surprising was that just realizing what she needed to know allowed her to know it, without any additional confirmation. Sarah uncovered two things. First, she discovered that if she could know that she fundamentally did not need her husband, did not need him to be happy or even okay, then this truth would free her from having to keep engaging in this particular grievance loop. If she could know that she would be okay with or without him, then her husband could continue forgetting what she told him, or not, but her basic well-being would not be dependent upon his changing. She could then feel at peace and free from the need to control or change him. Armed with the knowing of what she needed to know to be okay, Sarah was able to start offering herself this truth, which deep down she already knew, but along the way had lost sight of. She told herself the exact words she needed to hear. I will be okay, no matter what, with or without him. She said these words out loud, which allowed her to start focusing on her own happiness and drop out of this fight in her mind and with her husband. Through asking this question, she realized something else important, too. She discovered that if she didn't have to explain to her husband why his behavior was upsetting, and if it wasn't her responsibility to get him to agree with and empathize with her, then she would be able to leave this thinking pattern in the dust. Then she would be free from having to keep rehashing her rightness and confirming the legitimacy of her resentment. Furthermore, if she could note that her husband didn't have to understand her feelings in order for her to get to have them, then she would be okay. Then the struggle in her head would be over. As it turned out, amazingly, just by getting clear on what she needed to know, if this were true, Sarah discovered that she already knew it. In her gut, Sarah knew that her feelings did not require her husband's understanding or validation in order to exist. That her experience was real, valid, and deserving of kindness on its own, without any explanation or defense. But she also saw how she had been believing she had to come up with a way of explaining her feelings that her husband could understand, and that it wasn't until she got it that she would be validated and thus relieved. It wasn't until he allowed her feelings a seat at his table that she could be okay. But Sarah was able to go beyond these thoughts and beliefs by directly accessing and holding her own experience, without having to describe and explain them. As a result, Sarah broke free from the painful and obsessive thinking about why she was upset and why she was entitled to empathy. Just by knowing what she needed to know, she discovered what she already knew, a discovery that gave her the kindness and understanding she sought. It is an act of self-compassion just to ask yourself the question, what would I need to know that would free me to let go of these thoughts? If I could know this, I could move on. The next time you get caught in a negative thought loop, consider this inquiry. I call this question an act of self-compassion because even before we get to an answer, the question invites us into a space inside ourselves that holds what we know at a gut level, but haven't yet formulated or allowed ourselves to know or feel. The place where we go looking for an answer to this question is the place of our heart's longing, where we carry our real hurts, intuition, and also real wisdom. The asking and discovering itself is an act of kindness, a recognition of the longing and truth within us that rarely receives our full attention. If we ask our head this question, what would free us to move on? We will get a series of answers that may all be true, but don't usually touch the real pain we're carrying. As well, they're usually answers we already know, a list of our well-established grievances, newly framed, as if already resolved. When we pose this question to our heart and gut, however, and pause to really listen, we tend to find a more meaningful response, and a response that, in and of itself, helps us move forward. Offer yourself what you need most. Once we uncover what we wish we could know, we can then offer ourselves the morsels of comfort and wisdom we crave. And here's the thing. We can do this even if it doesn't feel 100% certain or true, yet. Just the act of offering ourselves the words we need to hear, spoken inside or aloud, is comforting and calming and filled with self-compassion. We might say to ourselves, "You're going to be okay, no matter what happens." Or, "I love you, and you're good, no matter how this plays out." Or, "You can be happy, even if nothing about this situation ever changes." The point is to give yourself and receive the words of love and support that hit your sweet spot. Bring your particular wounds relief and comfort, and set you free. If you're willing to use it, this question and offering can be a powerful tool in shutting off excessive thinking. Face your fear of letting go. When we're caught in a repetitive thought loop, it can feel like we literally have no choice but to continue spinning around in the same tornado until the thoughts decide to free us. But sometimes it can feel like we ourselves are choosing to stay looped in, spinning in the cyclone, despite how awful it feels. Sometimes when we try to extricate ourselves from a particular line of thinking, the urgency to stay with it, to keep the loop looping, can feel like a matter of life and death, as if turning away from the thoughts would risk our very survival. Letting go of the thoughts, it seems, would be far worse than staying in the thoughts. In such cases, we can actually use the intensity as an opportunity to become more self-aware. We can ask ourselves, if I drop these thoughts and move on, what am I afraid will be lost? What hope or possibility will be threatened? What part of me will die? It's often the case that our repetitive thought loops, particularly the life and death sort, are trying to preserve or support a certain self-image or identity. The belief is this: if we can get the other person to perceive us in the way we want to be perceived, see us as the person we want to be seen as, then, and only then, we will get to experience ourselves as that kind of person. We'll get to be that person. We can't stop thinking about how we're going to correct or control the other person's perception of us, because our own identity depends upon it. The drive to be perceived and experienced in a certain way gives birth to much of our addictive thinking. And it is this sort of thinking that can feel particularly sticky and impossible to leave behind. If we were to stop obsessing on the preservation and protection of our own identity, we would then risk the other's version of us, their story about us, becoming the one that defines us, the one that's considered true. To let go would mean to give up on being seen as who we want to be seen as, and sometimes give up on getting to experience ourselves as that because the two are linked. Further, what would perish would be the opportunity to be seen and known for who we really are, our goodness, and the very best in us. Abandoning such a thinking loop is tantamount to allowing the good version of ourselves to die. It all sounds a bit strange and nebulous, but inside the mind, these kinds of life and death battles are going on all the time. Just say no. We repeat the same negative thoughts to ourselves again and again. So why not repeat the same helpful thoughts with equal ferocity and redundancy? And indeed, here's one to repeat. No. No, I will not listen to, will not believe, will not attend to, will not respect, and will not indulge in this negativity against myself. The most powerful weapon we possess in our arsenal against negative thoughts may be the simplest. This clear, direct, and no-nonsense thought and instruction is probably more effective and forceful than any sophisticated strategy ever invented. Regardless of what's happening in your mind, what thoughts are popping into consciousness, you, the one listening or not listening to those thoughts, are emboldened with the final veto power. Though you may never have known this truth or practiced it, you can actually say no, stop it, go away, enough, to the contents of your own thoughts. You can also set up a mantra that contains a simple but definitive blanket order of self-protection to use whenever the urge to self-attack arises. Depending on your particular form of negative self-attack, it might be one of the following. No, I will not shame myself. I will not blame myself. I will not criticize myself. I will not make fun of myself. I will not terrify myself. I will not devalue myself. I will not say mean things to myself. No, and no matter what. When we join the No Matter What Club, we get to use this mantra indiscriminately. We don't have to vet the thoughts coming down the pike, argue with them, mount a case against them, or prove they're wrong in order to pull out our No card. When we really take on this affirmation with conviction, the reward is that we get to use this sweeping No, I will not card without any justification whatsoever. If a thought has even a whiff of unkindness, we get to play our No card and leave it at that. What's amazing is that you can make the decision to join the No Matter What Club right now. Inquire, can I change this? There is yet another inquiry we can pull out of the toolshed. The inquiry is targeted at a primary source of excessive thinking, namely, our fierce and persistent need to be in control. We ask ourselves, do I have control over this situation I'm trying to control through my thoughts? Is it in my power to change this situation? How long have I been trying to change it? And has it worked so far? We want to look deeply into the question of whether or not we are really in control. These questions, asked with curiosity, not criticism or mockery, can help us recognize these situations in which we really don't have control over the outcome, no matter how much we try to think the situation or person into what we want. Sometimes we have to fail long and hard enough, fail to change what we want to change, in order to realize that the situation is not ours to control. But when we get that we're really not in charge, we also understand the absurdity and futility in our obsessive thinking. Realizing what we cannot control marks the dawning of liberation. Realizing that we cannot change what we want to change, paradoxically, sets us free. We are no longer shackled to the problem, and no longer responsible for making it something else. We can't make it different, and sometimes that's the best news we can receive. No matter what we believe about God, or a larger intelligence in the universe, even if we believe nothing of the sort, we can still benefit from invoking the Serenity Prayer. Indeed, when we pray for serenity, we don't have to be praying to anything. If we want to address the prayer to a God or higher power, we can, but it's not necessary for reaping the benefits in such an authentic plea. It goes like this. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We can offer ourselves this prayer at any moment, and whenever we catch ourselves trying to think our way into controlling what's not ours to control. This simple prayer, this wish for ourselves, to accept what we cannot change and cannot control, is at the heart of our freedom from excessive thinking and from suffering. Ask whether you're willing to do something different. At the core of every change process lies the fundamental question, am I willing to do it differently? Am I willing to change? If we cannot say yes to this question, then we're not ready to change, not ready to be free just yet. Ask yourself, are you ready, really ready to change, no matter what it takes? It's okay if you're not. It's okay if right now you're just curious. There's no right or wrong answer to this question, but it's important to get honest about where you are in the change process. When it comes to our addiction to thinking, doing something different, at the very least, means being willing to release our grip on thoughts at precisely the moments we don't want to release our grip, when we think we would be most unwise to do so. And indeed, these are the moments we must be willing to do so, to try something new, even if we don't yet trust it. To try something new just because the way we're doing it is not working. As well, change means being willing to stop figuring out what we're convinced needs figuring out, and to leave things unfigured out, unsolved as they are. Transformation, when it comes to our thinking, requires the willingness to consider that there might be another path to happiness, to peace, other than through more thinking. There might be a way we can't yet see and won't see, as long as we're relying on thinking to find it. Ultimately, we must be willing to consider the possibility that thinking is not the solution to life, and might, in fact, be the problem itself. The radical and radically different choice has to happen right inside the hurricane of thoughts. That is, the choice to let go of our thoughts, let go of the stories, again and again, and intentionally escort our attention back to the present moment. This is what we do differently. What changes, then, through the process, is who we think we are, from the thoughts themselves to the one letting go of the thoughts. This is the fresh path we must be willing to walk, the change we must be willing to implement. As you start observing your own mind and its particular patterns and styles, this new reality of not being your thoughts will find its own unique expression within you. What's important is that you pay close attention to what relating with your thoughts differently means for you, and what change is necessary in your own process and habits. Practice what I offer here, but don't ignore your own inner wisdom. Listen inside. The goal here is to unlock a deeper awareness, one that knows itself as not thought, and also knows freedom. This awareness can return you to the present moment and to the life that thoughts have kidnapped you from, and from you. Chapter 8. Come back to the life you're missing. Excessive thinking takes us into some dark and dangerous neighborhoods inside our own mind. That much is clear. But thinking is also a thief. Thinking kidnaps the present moment, and in doing so, kidnaps our life. If we're busy thinking, we're not here. Our attention is somewhere else, which means we are somewhere else. Psychologists at Harvard discovered that we're lost in thought almost 50% of the time. For literally half our life, we're distracted and absent from what's happening in our present moment. Your body is forever present. When we imagine where our inner thinker is located, where the me that's doing the thinking actually lives in our physical body, most of us imagine it to be sitting somewhere behind our eyes or inside our head. We experience this entity we call me, the one thinking, as a miniature version of ourselves, a mini-me who sits inside our skull. When we're thinking, which is generally whenever we're awake, our attention and energy are focused inside our head. Hence the expression, living in our head. As a result of our head-centered existence, we lose connection with our physical body. We forget that there's actually an organism transporting this head around, a whole universe below our neck. We end up walking around as little floating heads, clouds of thought, untethered from our physical reality. Remarkably, no matter how much we're living in our head, our body is still here, still busy doing its thing, keeping us alive. Our body is here in the present moment, regardless of whether our attention chooses to sync up with it. While our thoughts transport us out of now to the past or future, or into a movie in our mind, our body is attending to what needs to happen now. In every moment, including this one, our body is breathing us, digesting the contents of our intestines, filtering the blood through our liver, signaling our heart to beat, and performing an infinite number of other life functions. Our body doesn't have the luxury of checking out or being distracted. If the body leaves now, that means we leave now, for good. Amazingly, the human being has been created with an innate and profound wisdom. The tasks associated with our survival have been assigned to something other than our mind. Anyone who's ever tried to meditate knows how hard it can be to keep our attention focused on a single breath, much less 10 breaths in a row. Imagine what would happen if we had to rely on our attention to keep our heart beating, or accomplish any of the other tasks our body does to keep us alive. The fact that we don't have to pay attention to staying alive in order to stay alive is great news. For one thing, it means that we'll get to stick around for a while. But it also means that we're provided, free of charge, with an amazing gift. Just south of our head sits a foolproof portal through which we can enter this present moment. The instant we drop into our senses, we've caught a direct flight into now. Exercise. Out of your head, into your body. Consciously shift your attention out of your head and down into your body. Unhook from your thought stream. Take a deep breath. Feel the weight and presence of your body, the inner hum of your own aliveness. Feel the experience of being embodied, fully here. Explore what this feels like, inhabiting your body, being, not doing. Know, too, that you can drop into this place of inner presence, of embodied being, whenever you wish or need. Forever present, your body waits for you to rejoin it. Learn to directly experience feelings. In addition to checking out of the body, Thinking allows us to check out of our feelings, to avoid them. When we don't want to experience what we're living, even if we don't know exactly what it is, we use thinking as a way to escape. We are well trained and highly skilled at thinking about our problems. We know how to turn them around, upside down, and every which way, for hours, days, weeks, and even lifetimes. But we're often unskilled at actually feeling our feelings. We're afraid of difficult feelings and certain that if we do allow ourselves to feel our feelings, we'll be stuck in them forever. In response to the threat of emotional discomfort, the mind steers us in more familiar and safe directions. We get busy thinking about our problems, interpreting them, unpacking them, and devising solutions and strategies to solve them, all in a masked effort to avoid actually experiencing them. The mind will always choose to think about difficult emotions rather than feel them. Thinking is the most effective and universally accepted method we've got for avoiding our own experience. Amazingly, we're never taught how to experience feelings, not directly anyway. Most people don't even realize that thinking about emotions is not the same thing as feeling them. From an early age, we learn how to make pro and con lists, to investigate and contemplate the causes of our feelings, to understand why we're feeling the way we are, and most of all, to figure out a solution to the problems causing our feelings. But these mental gymnastics, while interesting and sometimes helpful for understanding and framing our experience, also keep us far away from the actual feelings themselves. We love the why questions. Why do we feel the way we do? But we run from the what questions. What do we actually feel? And we run even faster from the possibility of actually feeling it. Thinking and talking about our problems, while designed to keep us away from our feelings, actually leave us stuck in them. In fact, the only way through a difficult feeling is through it. We have to feel our emotions in order for them to heal and change. We have to experience the feelings, not just think and talk about them. Exercise. Ask the body. Take a deep, slow breath into your abdomen. Relax. Feel the sensations in your body. Take a moment to arrive here. Now, pick a situation or relationship that's stressful. Don't pick something traumatic or deeply unsettling. Pick something at a stress level of about 6 or 7 out of 10. Place a hand on your heart, and if it feels comfortable, one on your abdomen. Now ask yourself, how does this situation feel? Spend a couple of minutes just listening to what comes. If you're like most people, the first round of answers will mostly be an explanation or description of what you feel and think about this situation. The thoughts that come will be an interpretation or summary of why you feel the way you do. The first response generally comes from your mind. It's a presentation of your case and why you're right to feel the way you do. Ask yourself again, how does this situation feel? This time, don't ask your head. Instead, ask your gut, your heart, or wherever feels right. Ask your body what it's like for it to carry this situation around. Usually, when we ask our body what it's like to carry a problem, we get a less intellectual answer. The words that come are feeling words, like, I'm hurt, or I'm angry, or I feel sad or heartbroken. Or sometimes, I feel a pit in my stomach, or a thickness in my chest, or a fuzziness in my head. The idea at this second level is to get past your narrative about the situation, out of the head, and into the emotional and physical experience of the situation, into the body. Notice where in your body you experience this situation and how it presents itself. Just notice without judgment. Now ask the question a third time, but rather than asking yourself how the situation feels, invite yourself to simply feel the situation and the feelings that are present. That is, do not describe, explain, or narrate them. Just feel those places in your body where sensation is present. Keep your hand on your heart and feel what your chest feels like without naming or judging it. Do the same for your gut. The idea is not to report to yourself on how you feel, but rather to simply feel what's happening inside you, directly, without describing or explaining it to yourself. If there's a tightness in your chest, feel the tightness itself. If there's a fluttering in your belly, experience the fluttering itself. If there's an overall sense of heaviness, just feel that. Don't tell yourself about what's happening in you. Climb out of the avoidance trench. We use our excessive thinking not only as a way to not feel our feelings, but also to avoid making real changes in our life. As one client put it, if I were to stop constantly thinking about my marriage, dissecting all the problems, I might actually have to get a divorce. While thinking about a difficult situation can certainly help us determine the next right steps to take, often we use thinking to postpone or avoid taking the actions that will create change. We devise and revise our thoughts about what's not working in our life and think up all sorts of interesting strategies for making things better. Rational timelines and plans. Good ideas indeed. But we get stuck there, in the thinking and planning part of the process. We fail to move on to actually taking the steps we spend so much time thinking about and are so good at designing. Thinking, it turns out, can be the place we get waylaid, the quicksand to our forward movement. And yet, we don't realize that it's the thinking about process itself that's keeping us stuck. Ask yourself, are you using thinking as a way to avoid doing what needs to be done? Choose real life over your fictions. What is most problematic about our addiction to thinking, however, is our incessant use of thinking as a means to make sense of our life. Our mind spends most of its time threading together bits and pieces of experience, every random perception, in fact, and organizing that information into a meaningful narrative that will tell the story of our life and who we are. Naturally, since we are the author, our storylines are written with ourselves as the protagonist, and our own biases and conditioning steering the plot line. Creating a narrative for our life is a normal process, one designed to make meaning out of our experience. There's nothing wrong with its intention, but in scripting the meaning out of our experience and perceptions, we lose touch with what's actually happening in reality. We end up living and believing our made-up personal narrative on reality, which has been distorted and altered by our own psychology and conditioning. We don't see reality as it is. We see a reality of our own making, one that supports the larger movie going on inside our head. Thinking acts as a funhouse mirror, turning reality into something other than what it is. Jane was sitting at a cafe when she felt a sharp pain in her foot. Immediately, thoughts flooded in about what was causing it. She decided the pain was a result of recently having gone running after not having exercised in months. From there, she concluded that she couldn't expect good things in her life if she wasn't willing to do the work for it, and that it was her choice to not run that was making her fat, which is why she had no boyfriend, and of course, why she would live with cats for the rest of her life. Soon, she was tangled up in a storyline about how her whole life was a failure and she was to blame. Within minutes, Jane had traveled from a pain in her foot into a narrative on her inadequacy, transforming a generally pleasant present moment into a fiery state of internal agitation and self-loathing. That pain in her foot, the cause of which was unknown, and which most likely would have passed without much ado, led to a state of hopelessness and despair, an internal reality that featured Jane as a guilty and pathetic character. In another example, Lily was taking a walk with a friend when she noticed an unfamiliar expression on her friend's face. Rather than ask the woman what was going on, if she had a toothache perhaps, she immediately decided that her friend's expression was a result of the birthday present she gave her. Undoubtedly, her gift wasn't expensive or special enough. Lily then concluded that her friend had no right to be disappointed in her, because the friend hadn't even shown up for her wedding and never given her a present at all. Lily was now pissed off, resentful, and defensive, fully convinced that she was being judged for not being a good enough friend. Within moments, Lily was living in a self-constructed hell. The expression on her friend's face had been twisted into a narrative and a reality entirely of her own making. She was in a tizzy for reasons that made sense only in her own inner movie, and she still didn't have any idea what was going on with her friend's face. As human beings, we do this with and to every situation we encounter. Something happens, and we think it into something entirely unrecognizable from its original form, a projection made of our own conditioning, wounds, belief systems, memories, and everything else we've ever lived. Reality is used only as a launching pad for our own fictions. We live what we think about our life, not what it actually is. Finally, let's consider Karen, whose narrative-making recently cost her the job she loved. Karen checks yes to 8 of the 11 thinking addiction criteria. Karen is also just a normal, well-adjusted person, and definitely not someone you would say is dysfunctional or delusional. She recently told me about a situation going on in which a coworker was, in Karen's storyline, not doing her job the way she should have been, and the backup was creating a lot of extra work for Karen. She had spent an enormous amount of time thinking about this coworker and her resentments against her. 1,000 times, Karen had replayed the things she wanted to say to her, but had never actually said anything about how she perceived the situation. Using the small bits and pieces of what she knew of this woman in the office, Karen had created a convincing story about how this coworker felt entitled to do whatever she chose, and more importantly, how she assumed that Karen would pick up her slack. Karen described the woman as a show pony, and herself as the workhorse. In truth, Karen knew very little about this woman's history or current life situation, but nonetheless, she had a complicated and well-developed idea of what made her tick, and most importantly, what this woman thought of Karen. At a meeting with the top players in the company, Karen's long percolating, obsessive thinking finally exploded. Utterly convinced of the rightness of her narrative, she gave voice to her thoughts and proceeded to announce the story she had written in her mind about this coworker. As it turned out, the coworker, who Karen had been obsessively thinking about, had a child at home who was ill. She had been doing less work, but with the blessing of management. Karen was later fired for her display of anger and disrespect. Karen's unskillful words cost her the job, But it was her obsessive thinking that led to those unskillful words. The event happened because her thoughts had been allowed to spin off without awareness, doubt, or restraint. Ultimately, what made the situation feel unmanageable for Karen was her story of being intentionally humiliated, a workhorse to her colleagues' show pony. Without even realizing it, we are all incessantly thinking up our own stories about other people, situations, and indeed ourselves. We play the roles of actor and director inside our own personal movie, the movie we've constructed and believe is really happening. Thoughts tell us, she is like this, he is like that, and most importantly, they think X, Y, and definitely Z about me. We then go looking for evidence that confirms our story, using whatever we can find to validate our narrative while ignoring or invalidating everything that contradicts or doesn't serve it. Next, we act on the story and the meaning we've constructed in our mind. This last step is where things really start to go awry. Our faith in thinking is predicated on the idea that our reality, our movie, is also everyone else's reality, the reality. And yet, the snag we run into, time and again, is that what we think is happening often has little to do with what anyone else thinks is happening, happened, or is true. There's no better place to witness this phenomenon than in my role as a couples therapist. What's stunning is how two people can live the same event, and yet what they think happened in that same event, from one person to the next, is unrecognizable. It might be the same trip to the movies, but other than the name of the movie, literally nothing else is the same. And sometimes even the name is not the same. What's actually happening from one person to the next is startlingly different. Our narratives on reality are filled with useful information, not, however, about the people, places, and things they proclaim to be about, but rather about ourselves and our own thoughts. The whole storyline we construct about our life is a matrix of our own making. Figuring out life, based solely on our personal narrative, is an exercise in futility and absurdity. We imagine we know why others do what they do, their true intentions, and of course what they must do to improve and change. But most of the time, when we are making these interpretations and judgments, we are not in relationship with these other people. Not really. We are in a relationship with our own memories, disappointments, and beliefs, and with all the people we've ever known. Through our narratives, we are trying to confirm or correct a certain perception of ourselves, an identity we want or don't want to project. The stories we construct about others stem from our own projections and conditioning. Ultimately, we see who we are, not what is. No longer foisting our reality on others. To maintain a functioning society, we need to agree on and share certain basic realities. Right now, we would probably all agree that I am sitting at a desk in front of a computer. We would agree that it's currently raining, although you might say it's drizzling, not raining. As for the concrete elements of life, we generally find consensus without much difficulty. But when it comes to our personal realities, our subjective experience, and the meaning we assign to every waking moment, there, we're all living in profoundly different universes. What's amazing is that each of these realities is real and true for the one who's living it, as real and true as our own reality is for us. We imagine our reality to be shared, but in fact, there are billions of coexisting personal realities, billions of different worlds happening in this one physical world. We are all in our own separate theaters. witnessing different shows, and yet we imagine and behave as if we're in the same audience, watching the very same event we call real life. When we buy into the delusion that our thoughts are the truth for everyone, we suffer, imprisoned by the certainty of our own narrative and the burden of having to make life go the way we think it should go. Thankfully, however, it's not our job to get the world to see reality as it really exists, otherwise known as our reality, the way it exists inside our own mind. We don't have to carry the responsibility for promulgating the absolute truth, don't have to correct anyone else's version of what is. Whenever we're ready, we can surrender the whole fight. Our truth can be true for us, while other people's truths can be true for them. We are liberated from the need to control our external world, and all those in it, when we realize that our version of the truth, which not coincidentally places us at the center of what's driving everyone and everything else, is not the truth in any fundamental sense. Our version of reality is important, but it is still just that, our version of reality. The sooner we accept this, the sooner we find peace. Accepting the still quandary of now. When we're thinking, the content of our thoughts is usually about something to do with the past or future. But this moment, the one happening now, is a kind of gap, poised between the two locations or two concepts, past and future. In the now, time disappears. When we're fully engaged in the present moment, thinking is not actually needed. For this reason, the present moment presents a quandary for the thinking mind: how to find a place for itself in the present moment. The mind's solution to this quandary, often, is to shift our attention to something we can think about, something still to come, or, alternatively, something that's already happened. But when thinking and the present moment bump into each other, what transpires is a whole lot of thinking about now, thoughts on what the present moment means, whether or not we like it, and our very favorite subject, what the present moment says about ourselves. I recently gave a dear friend a heartfelt hug, just spontaneously. Upon exiting the hug, he immediately remarked, "Where's that hug coming from?" In thinking the hug into an idea, the felt experience of the hug was lost. This is how we roll as human beings, forever turning what's happening into a mental construct, thinking our way out of feeling and experiencing life. Get out of your own way. It turns out that arriving in the present moment is a lot easier than we think, and easier than our thinking mind would like us to believe. In the book, The Inner Game of Tennis, the legendary sports psychologist, Timothy Galway, explains the importance of present moment attention in the creation of excellence and mastery. Galway discovered that when elite tennis players spent a lot of time thinking about what they needed to do to produce a successful swing, they were able to improve and produce that desired swing for a time. But their improvement didn't last. Soon they started thinking about their progress, what it said about their identity, why they hadn't gotten it in the past, and how they were going to keep it in the future. As a result, their success became something to not lose. Their improvement soon disappeared, and frustration returned. Galway then discovered that when an athlete learned to simply say bounce every time the ball bounced and hit every time the ball made contact with a racket, radical improvement occurred in the athlete's swing, and most importantly, the improvement was permanent as long as the practice was continued. The words bounce and hit were not revolutionary in and of themselves. They were simply practices Galway invented to help distract the athletes from thinking about all the other things that got in the way of their attention. Naming each bounce and hit allowed the tennis players to maintain present moment awareness, to stay in that point, and not get lost in their thoughts and judgments about what was happening on the court. Galway's students needed to distract themselves from the distraction of their own thoughts. They needed to learn how to stop thinking about how to be great, to get their mind out of the way, and to allow their body to do what it was trained to do. Most tragically, in thinking our way out of the present moment, we deprive ourselves of the experience of joy. Thinking is the thief of joy. Trapped in our thoughts, we fail to notice the opportunities for gratitude and awe that are forever presenting themselves. We miss the moments that can inspire wonder and appreciation. We might be walking through a field of flowers, but where we are, really, is trapped in a conversation that happened that morning or 2 years ago. Or maybe we're obsessing about the names of the flowers on the path, how we should get our kid into gardening, or the 6th grade teacher who shamed us about our planting skills. But regardless of what we're thinking, the end result is that we've missed the whole field and the experience of joy and wonder it might have awakened in us. Thoughts cloud our inner sky, prevent us from seeing the beauty that resides within us and in our world. Ask yourself, what do I miss? And what do I miss out on? Because I'm busy thinking.